We're living in a time of intense speculation right now. There are a couple of factors. One is that there's growing debt, personal debt, student debt, mortgage debt, also debt of cities and municipalities. As wages have been stagnant for decades and school costs skyrocket, we have people trying to make ends meet by going into debt. And then that gets picked up by the finance folks and repackaged in CDOs and all of the things we learned about when it comes crashing down, like it did in 2008. And as we also learned, the state will step in to bail out at least the biggest banks as too big to fail, but shift the burden in austerity programs on the general population. The other thing about speculation that we're seeing dramatically is investment in real estate. So we've got not only gentrification in neighborhoods to drive up profits, but real estate investments simply for speculative investments, large towers with apartments sitting empty because they're just investments while people are being pushed out onto the streets. So you have these forces from cheap nature and cheap money that are creating what David Harvey calls dispossession, or Saskia Sassens talks about as expulsions. And we're seeing people expelled from housing in particularly urban centers all over the world because of the speculation. We're seeing land grabbing as people, companies and even countries are speculating in grabbing land for minerals, for planting, for water. We see people, for example, in Houston and in Puerto Rico, driven from homes because of climate crises. We just have read recently about Houston houses built in an area that was already known to be a flood zone reservoir. And when the flood came, the houses are worthless, and now speculators are pouring in to try to make a profit off of that. People think Flint, Michigan, people being losing the values of their homes and sometimes having to leave because of poisoned water. People having to leave economies because of lack of jobs, energy pipelines. So all of these are forces from the system itself that are driving people from their homes, from their jobs, and from their land. And so sites of resistance, clearly, of the tensions between the two, debtor-creditor, landlord-tenant, but all of the different kinds of struggle against these expulsions. The last cheap I want to talk about is the cheap for capital of the services that the state provides. The state in a capitalist system provides the role of helping to guarantee a certain infrastructure for capitalist production. So they want all of the roads and buildings and infrastructure. They want the state to set laws and regulation of commerce so that there's allegedly an equal playing field between capitalist enterprises. And they want the state to be responsible for policing and armies. This clearly gets us into the whole role of the state, and particularly I'm speaking right now of the US, keeping other states in check so that the country can go in and take the resources, people's markets that it needs to keep the system going. So imperialism, wars, resource wars, colonialism are structures to guarantee those the ability of this system to keep operating on a global scale. It also, sites of contestation in terms of the state is, as I mentioned, capital doesn't want to have to pay for this, but they want it. So they want the citizenry in the country to be the ones, the workers, to be the ones that pick up the costs. So the battles there in contestation are over budgets and taxes, who's going to pay and who's going to lose. Budget includes healthcare, housing, education, all of the basic social services. Battles that we have over the country going to war and waging war for resources around the world. Battles over policing, the system, the capital wants the state to keep people working, buying, consuming, but not rebelling. So battles right now between Black Lives Matter and policing is an example of signs of contestation. ACA, the battles recently over who's going to pay for healthcare and whether there'll be healthcare for the general public, and infrastructure, crumbling bridges, because the capital has actually been very effective in recent decades in decimating taxes and the state, either through tax reform that we saw in 2017, offshore tax havens, austerity programs on working people that have had these kinds of effects. So this is the picture of the system, and we see that there are multiple sites of contestation where we have battles going on, and all of those battles are very important to the struggle, understanding that these are all part of both the mechanisms of the system and the current crisis that the system's in. So I want to wrap up by saying that all the current sites of the struggle are important and interconnected. We need to grab onto one of them, but also understand that we need to connect and ally with the others in taking on a system that is working against the interests of people and against the interests of the earth. That includes people who are hurting, who voted for the current administration, but it means helping folks identify who really benefits and how all the rest of us lose if we don't work together.